PBS Utah presents the Governor's Monthly News Conference, an exchange between Utah reporters and Governor Spencer Cox.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see all of you again. Thank you for coming out today. I know it's been a busy time, especially in our office, as we are working our way through the legislature's bills. They all go on vacation, and I have 20 days to review all 513 of those bills. So we still feel like we are very much in the middle of the legislative session, and looking forward to finish things up next week. I'm guessing you may have some questions about legislation. I'm happy to answer, but just before we go there, I wanted to draw your attention to a recent report that came out by the nonpartisan group called Trust for America. They released their annual Ready or Not report this week, which places Utah in the top tier of states ready for various emergencies. And we so appreciate, obviously, we've gone through a pandemic. There are lots of other emergencies that can happen in a state, and we appreciate those at the local level and the state level who work so hard to make sure that we are prepared. There are three different groupings. There's a top tier grouping of states, a middle tier, and then a low tier. And Utah was in the top tier. And so we're excited to note that we are continually preparing for whatever comes our way. I will also just wish everyone a very happy St. Patrick's Day. Deeply disappointed in some of you for not being very festive in the way you're dressed today, and we'll expect more. And I have to give a shout out to my favorite person on St. Patrick's Day. It's my dad's birthday today, so happy birthday, Dad. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Governor, this morning a lawsuit was filed against the state, including your Lieutenant Governor, about redistricting by the League of Women Voters, accusing the state essentially of cracking and creating partisan gerrymandering maps, particularly for the congressional delegation. Your response to it?
Well, we don't comment on active litigation, and so you mentioned it was filed this morning. We have not been served. I have not seen that copy yet, and so we'll look forward to receiving that lawsuit. But this is something that we've talked about at length, and I'm not sure there's any more to add to the discussion out there.
So you defend what you did, signing this in, accepting these congressional maps. You don't believe this was gerrymandering?
Correct.
Governor, this morning, local officials...
Sorry, let me just add, illegal gerrymandering.
This morning, local bid officials confirmed that Salt Lake City will not host the 2024 Republican National Convention. Your thoughts on that? It's the third time Salt Lake's bid has not come up.
Sure. It's not really that surprising. Historically, both parties usually choose battleground states, or states where they need to make an effort and they're trying to recruit voters that will play a larger role in the presidential election. For the past many years, Utah has not been one of those states. We are a very conservative state, a very Republican state, very reliable state. So I'm actually more surprised that we keep getting mentioned in the top 3 or 4 than I am that we didn't get selected. All of that being said, we are very good at this. That's why we keep getting mentioned. We're very good at hosting large events, welcoming the world here. We've certainly been able to prove that and show that with the Olympics, with NBA All-Star Games, with big conventions. And so those same articles did mention, though, that we are a candidate for 2028. It is possible that the RNC will not wait to do this every 4 years. It's possible that they'll reward another state fairly soon, and so we'll keep our hat in the running for 2028 and see what happens.
Governor, there's still a bill. You met with Senator McKay about House Bill 11, the transgender athletics bill. At this point, you have yet to veto it. Are you still planning to?
Well, one of the things that most people don't realize is, as I mentioned, legislators go on vacation right after the legislative session ends. So does legislative staff. And so we don't actually get the bills. Most of the bills don't come until later in the week. I didn't even get get most of those bills until late Tuesday, so I've only had them for a couple days. We're just going through them in order, all 513, in the order that they come into our office. Those bills that were passed the last night of the session were some of the last to come into our office, so we just haven't gotten there yet, and I suspect we will in the next couple of days, but nothing has changed.
Governor, has your thinking shifted at all on that issue, on that bill? And could you explain to us, what would you say to your fellow conservatives who feel strongly about this issue, who think there should be a ban in place? What would your message be to them?
Well, I think one of the important messages that maybe didn't get enough attention is that everyone knows what's going to happen, and that is that there will be a lawsuit, and it will be a very expensive lawsuit. There was something very troubling that happened on the last night of the session, and this is what happens when you try to do things at the last minute without any input. And that is that our school districts were removed from indemnification in that bill, and the Utah High School Athletic Association did not receive any indemnification, which they've been requesting for 2 years. If this were to happen, it is very likely that this bill will bankrupt the Utah High School Athletic Association, and those are their words, not mine. They've just been through a very costly lawsuit that burned through all of their reserves, and so all this bill does is invite a lawsuit. I mean, it specifically talks about a lawsuit in the bill, and so as conservatives, it doesn't make any sense for us to just buy a lawsuit and with no indemnification. So if you want to bankrupt the Utah High School Athletic Association, if you want to cost the poor school district that ends up with this first lawsuit, which will happen, will have to spend millions of dollars, because there is no governmental immunity for these types of lawsuits. There was a lot of misinformation on the floor that night. People were asking questions about this. There were wrong answers given, then right answers were trying to give them correctly. And all of this happened because it happened so fast. School districts, had they had an opportunity to weigh in, would say, look, if this is what you want to do, that's fine, but these lawsuits are ongoing across the country. Let's wait and see what happens with these lawsuits, and not cost millions of dollars and not bankrupt the High School Athletic Association. And so when people understand that, even people that are passionate about a ban, most of them come around and say, yeah, this is a really bad bill and a really bad idea, and again, just terrible process.
Senator McKay told me he apologized to you during your meeting for not communicating with you ahead of time and for the process aspect of it. Do you want to comment on what he said and your thoughts on his apology?
Well, I always appreciated an apology, and I think his words speak for themselves.
Governor, given that median single-family home prices are nearing $600,000 in Salt Lake and Utah counties, is the housing market getting out of hand?
Yeah, it is. There's no question about it, and that's true nationally. It's certainly true in the Intermountain West, where we are seeing these extraordinarily high prices, and that's why we passed several bills. I appreciate the legislature's work in helping to pass bills that we believe will increase supply and in turn reduce housing prices. I do worry that there are market corrections coming. Certainly, there are trends that don't look great. We saw interest rates being raised for the first time in maybe 3 years. I'm trying to remember back how long it's been. Yesterday, the Fed has signaled that there will be multiple interest rate increases coming up, and so I am worried about that. I'm worried about what happens as all of this federal money, this kind of fake sugar high that we're on right now, makes its way through the system, and what will happen on the back end of that. Of course, what we're seeing with inflation across the board, and I'm very worried with what's happening in Asia right now with the coronavirus, because they have not done a good job of getting people vaccinated, especially in China, and this explosive growth that they're now seeing, that we're going to see supply chains constrained again, especially the supply chains related to those markets, and what that could mean, and not to mention war in Europe. So there are certainly economic economic clouds on the horizon that give us pause, and that we're watching very closely, and that we've been preparing for. And that's what I will say coming out of this legislative session. Again, incredible collaboration on the budget, really thinking ahead, making sure that we're not overspending, that we're putting money away, saving for rainy days, and it is possible that those rainy days are ahead. So that means, you know, as market corrections come, that hopefully we will see housing prices come down, but we hope that those housing prices can come down not at the expense of the citizens of Utah because of them being harmed economically.
Governor, speaking of inflation, gas prices have risen more than $1 from last month to now, according to AAA. What are you and your team actively doing to help Utahns at the pump?
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. So we've had our budget teams working on this issue, trying to figure out what we can do. I actually met with the Speaker and the President to have that very conversation yesterday. Those conversations are ongoing, and we will be meeting with lots of different people that participate in the supply chain when it comes specifically to gas and petroleum products, and seeing what we can do as a state to alleviate the pressure, and again, more broadly than just gas prices. This inflation that's been happening for quite a while now is deeply concerning. Gas prices are a part of it, but people are feeling it in other ways as well. They're feeling it with commodities, food prices, of course, rents and housing that we've already talked about, automobiles. There are several different areas where we're feeling it, but the one thing about gas prices is that it impacts everything else as well, right? Because we use petroleum products to get food to the stores and to move automobiles to where they need to be in the country. So there is a compounding effect that happens with gas prices, and so we'll continue to see what we can do to help alleviate that.
So, Governor, do you support forgiving the gas tax while prices are so high?
So that's one of the things that we're looking at, and one of the things that we're talking about. It's a little more complicated in Utah than other places because the money that we have to spend as government is not fungible. It doesn't. We can't move it around like other states can. Gasoline, the tax on gasoline goes directly to UDOT to pay for their employees. And so if I were to unilaterally remove the gas tax, to lay off all of UDOT's employees, which is not great. That's a really bad idea. Filling potholes, pushing snow. Hopefully, we have more snow coming. Those types of things. And so, if we were to do something like that, it's much more complicated, and it would mean bringing the legislature back into session and figuring out how to move dollars around in a way that is very constitutional, very difficult, and potentially unconstitutional, because we have constitutional limits on the ability to move money around as well. So those are some of the things that was part of the discussion this year about the education fund and income tax. And so it's a lot more complicated than some states where they can just say, oh, look, we're just going to forgive the gas tax and we can pay for that some other way. We don't have the ability to do that here in the state of Utah, and that's why we have to talk about lots of different things and see if that is one potential way, but are there other ways that we can look at as well?
California is considering a rebate of about $400 for its residents to make up for higher gas costs. Is that something you're considering?
That's an interesting proposal. Like I said, everything's on the table. We haven't specifically discussed that. We did pass a $200 million tax cut that will be going back to people. I had proposed a type of rebate, a food tax rebate of sorts. That did not get through the legislature, and so I don't know if that's something the legislature would be open to, but certainly worth discussing.
Can you be more specific? You keep saying you're having talks, you're doing things. Yeah. Can you elaborate on what those things are?
So we're also talking about what can we do to increase production and work with suppliers to lower the rates here. What can we do to increase production, both in the raw materials portion of that, the refining portion of that. So we're putting together a meeting to talk with the petroleum industry here in the state of Utah. We hope to do that sometime in in the next week, and we want to look at every point along the process and what that means. And again, just removing the gas tax doesn't necessarily completely lower the cost of gasoline either, because it's priced at the rack, or taxed at the rack, excuse me. And so we would need the participation of gas stations and suppliers as well, even if that was the direction we went. So there are lots of people that play a role in this process, and we want to have those conversations with everyone.
And what do you think when you see gas, for $4.30, $4.40? Just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously it's really difficult. My family buys gasoline too, and it's really hard. We have taken a look at it across the past 20 years to look at the burden on people, and the bad news, and it's all bad news. I mean, there's no good news. I mean, it is the highest actual amount that we've ever paid here in the state of Utah. As a burden on taxpayers, it's not the highest we've ever had, just because of inflation. So there are a couple ways that you can look at that. One is just the cost of commodities back in 2008 versus today. So even though it's higher now than in 2008, because of general inflation, the burden isn't quite as high as it was in 2008. That doesn't matter to people. It's still really high. If you measure it as a burden, as a percentage of average income in the state, because incomes have increased in the state over the past 10 years, past 15 years, it's also not the heaviest burden that we've seen, but it's still a really high burden. And the difference between those other times is that everything else is more expensive too, because we have general inflation. So again, in 2008. Where we saw the type of inflation around gas, we didn't have the same inflationary pressures on food and other things that we've seen. So so when you combine that total inflation, I believe that the pressure on families right now is as high as it's probably ever been. So deeply concerning. We know that it will change people will have to change their habits. They'll have to change the way they do things. That may mean that family vacation that people were planning on taking may not happen, or will have to be shortened or kept closer to home. And in the worst case scenarios, it means that families will have to choose between a tank of gas and food at the store, and that just can't be a choice.
So did the legislature fumble when they didn't consider your food tax credit?
Well, I wouldn't call it a fumble. I really liked our food tax credit. Obviously, they replaced it with something that I also love, and that is the earned income tax credit. Something I've been pushing for a long time, and was very excited to get across the finish line. And so no, I wouldn't say it was a fumble. And again, they didn't know at the time that we were working on taxes in January, which is when we worked on the tax portion of this. They had no idea that the gas taxes were going to spike to these levels.
Governor, you mentioned the war in Europe. Right now, Utah-based artist Galina Perova is trying to get her family members who are Ukrainian refugees to Salt Lake City. Utah has typically been very welcoming of refugees. What can your administration do to help this family and other Ukrainian refugees?
What we can do is to continue to put pressure on the administration, the Biden administration, to allow those refugees to come to the state of Utah. I do know, and again, I don't mean that in a negative sense. I believe that the president and others are actively working on this. We've been told they are. We understand that one of the things most people don't realize that generally the way the refugee system works, it takes years to get refugees here, and we've seen a recent exception to that was made for the Afghan refugees that had aided the United States government in the war in Afghanistan, and we were able to bring over 900 of those refugees here. What we are hearing as a possibility is that exactly the example that you gave, that family members of American citizens might be allowed a top priority, or be able to waive some of those some of those long-standing rules around processing refugees, and that is something that I would support and I would encourage. the lieutenant governor met with the Romanian ambassador, who shares a border with Ukraine, and just devastating what they're seeing in Romania and Poland even more so. The ability of these border countries to care for 2.5 now, probably pushing towards 3 million refugees is just impossible. And it's incredible to see. I mean, basically what they're doing now is just saying, hey, you live with this family, you live with this family. They're just taking them in as families. It's incredibly heartening to see the humanitarian efforts that are occurring there. I know a kid I grew up with in Fairview that just flew over to Poland on the border. He's a doctor and is providing aid. We're hearing there's a lot of hypothermia cases as people are walking for 20, 30 hours through the snow and the cold. And so the world needs to open their doors to these refugees, and Utah's doors are wide open.
What kind of pressure are you applying? What do those conversations look like?
Yeah, so we talk with our counterparts at the State Department and others, just letting them know, hey, we're ready when you're ready. Just know anything you need. It's more encouraging. Like, let us know and we'll jump. The same thing happened with the Afghan refugees, and I think that makes it an easier decision for them when they know that states are actively ready and willing to do whatever it takes.
Back to bills. Yeah. Are there any you plan to veto besides House Bill 11?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're still going through the bills. I've still got a few hundred to get through, so I don't want to say I don't want to say there aren't any. But what I can say right now is we haven't received many veto requests. In fact, I would say, at least in my time, in the 9 years, 10 years now that I've either served in the legislature as lieutenant governor or governor, that this is the lowest number of veto requests that we've ever seen, and that speaks very broadly. Again, with the exception, unfortunately, of what happened with just a couple hours left in the session, it speaks to what an incredible session it was, and the number of bills that didn't pass that people would have been very upset about and that we likely would have vetoed, and then the good bills that did pass. And so we're kind of stunned. Usually our inboxes just fill up with veto requests, and it's been fairly quiet. And so I don't have any right now that are on my list to veto.
Governor, Hispanic community and immigrants are waiting for the sign of Bill 216, which would make the driver's license test available in other language and not only in English. Your thoughts, and are you going to sign it when it arrives to your desk?
Claro que sí. Estamos muy animados de firmar esta cosa. Look, we're very excited for this bill. It's something we worked on and something that we supported. And yeah, we can't wait to sign it as soon as I get a chance to go through that bill.
Governor, can you give us an update on whether the state has found enough housing for the state's Afghan arrivals? I know you said last month that you were still looking for 50 housing units for 220 individuals.
I will have to get back to you on that. I have not gotten an update. What I do know is that we did have people reach out after that press conference and offer housing. I don't know if we quite got enough to get all of them, but I know we're getting very close. So I'll have to get an update and get back to you, and we're happy to do that.
We've talked a lot about housing today. Do you think it was a missed opportunity that the legislature didn't fully fund your housing request?
Well, obviously, I would love the legislature to adopt my budget wholesale, but I also realize that's not how it works, and there are 104 people that get to list their priorities, and they did that. What I will say is, if you were to compare my budget requests with what they actually passed, it's remarkably similar, and I think that shows not just that they agreed with what I did, but that we worked very closely together during the year to figure out what the top priorities are and to try to include their priorities in my budget as well. This is one where I would have loved to have had more money, but I'm not going to complain about the money that we got. It was very generous, historic numbers, numbers that we have never seen before, and some of the commentary coming out of the legislature was that there are still funds that were approved last year that haven't been spent yet, and they're correct about that as we're setting up these processes. And so let's see how we do. Come back and show us that you're spending these in the right ways and that it's making a difference, and that's important. they absolutely need to hold us responsible and make sure that we are using the funds in a way that makes a difference. So it wasn't no, it was here's a whole bunch of money, and then come back and let us know, and we'll get you more if things are working. So I welcome the opportunity to show that that we can spend this money in a way that impacts people, real people, and makes a difference. So I would say I'm generally excited. Would have loved more, but we're good with what we've got.
At this point, some water districts are proposing restrictions already, including no new landscaping, indoor water restrictions, as well as significant cuts in outdoor water use. What are you being updated on as far as the drought conditions, and what can we expect as things start warming up?
Yeah, thank you. So we get routine updates. I was updated just this week. It's a mixed bag. There is some good news, and obviously some bad news. Maybe I'll start with the just kind of a general report. Right now our snowpack is sitting at about 85% of normal. Normal years don't happen. You have big years and low years, and that's how we get to an average, right? And so most people would say that this is a pretty normal year, about as close as you can get to a normal year. In the past, we wouldn't have blinked an eye at 85% snowpack. That's great. That's fine. The problem is when you have 85% snowpack on the back of a couple really bad years, we need one of those 150% years. We need 3 or 4 of those 150% years. And so we certainly would have liked to have more snowpack. We are in a nice weather pattern right now where we're getting these storms. They're not huge storms, but they are coming regularly. That's good news. December was awesome. January, most of February were terrible. March has been good, and so that's some of the positive news. The bad news is, again, that our reservoirs were so far below normal, and I think on average we're about 10% below where we were last year at this time, and so that's not great. I suspect that we will end up with our reservoirs filled to a higher degree than we did last year once the spring runoff is occurred. So that's positive news. We're seeing the moisture content of the soil is much higher than it was last year, which means runoff will actually get there. So very positive. I am worried about Weber Basin. That's the one I'm most worried about. But we got everything passed in the legislature that we wanted, so we feel good.
Okay, that's all the time we have for our television broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us for the Governor's Monthly News Conference. And we would like to introduce John Monet. He's a senior at Judge Memorial High, and he's here as part of the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs. And John, go ahead with your question.
Hello. In July of 2021, Utah received a little over $300 million to help with the opioid epidemic in Utah. At the time, you said that you looked forwards to working with the legislature to determine the best use of these funds to benefit Utahns with the opioid crisis. It's been 6 months since then, and the legislative session. What have you done in that time, and what are you doing in the future with that money?
Yeah, so we have a task force that meets together regularly and talks about how that's going to be distributed. We've also had those conversations with the legislature. Those conversations are still ongoing. We haven't actually gotten the money yet. So that settlement, although proposed, is still working its way through the system. The biggest discussions were around which local governments were going to opt in with the state government, because the way the settlements worked, there was some friction there over how much money the state would get versus how much money the local governments would get. So what we've been working on right now is just figuring out how to divide that money. We finally came to an agreement a couple weeks ago that allows it to be distributed evenly. So basically 50-50 split between the state and the locals. Now, determining exactly where that's going to be spent or how that's going to be spent hasn't been fully decided yet. So we will be moving on. Once those agreements are all signed and the money starts to come in, then we'll be moving on to the next piece of that. We certainly have some ideas about where it should be spent with our Department of Health, who's been working on this significantly. Local governments have been working on it as well. There's several areas. Obviously, a big portion of this will be spent on prevention and helping prevent opioid abuse in any way possible. The other piece of this will definitely need to be spent on mitigation, really trying to mitigate the effects that this opioid epidemic has had on our society. And there's a disproportionate impact that has happened in our rural communities, for sure, as deaths of despair have risen. And how do we help instill hope? How do we improve economies in such a way that people feel whole, people have wonderful communities, people can provide for their families, and can avoid some of the hopelessness and despair that comes from these. So there are several programs out there. We're evaluating those programs right now, seeing how effective they are. We want to make sure that we don't waste this opportunity and spend this money in ways that won't make a difference. So as we evaluate these programs, see which ones are working and which aren't, I think we'll be able to make a real impact. I will also know that we don't get all of that money all at once. It comes over the course of a decade or more, and so we'll be getting those tranches of money and then making sure we're spending them wisely. Great question. Thank you, John. Thank you.
We would like to go to remote reporter Chris Reed with St. George News. Go ahead with your question.
And good morning, Governor, and a happy birthday again to your father.
Thanks, Chris.
And absolutely, would just like to ask a member, going back to the water issue, a member of the St. George City Council said last week that if a solution is not found to bring more water to southern Utah, that the area needs to be prepared to not be a growth economy anymore. What are the drawbacks of moving away from a growth economy? And there's some people who say we don't want to grow anymore. What would you say to those people?
Well, it's hard to not be in growth economies. If you want to look at some states or some cities that have not had growth economies, I think the comparisons are fairly stark, and you definitely don't want to be in one of those places. The other problem with that is once you go out of a growth economy, then you, in a place like St. George, again, one of two things happen. One, your economy falls apart, or the other thing is then you just become a place where only the ultra wealthy can live, and no, our kids and grandkids can't live there. Usually, people I talk to that have that mindset are people who have just moved here recently, or don't have kids and grandkids that they want to live in the area. It reminds me of something a person I met a while back said that an environmentalist is somebody who built their cabin last year. So we certainly see that. It's I got mine. I don't want anybody else to get theirs. And so there are certainly things that we can do to mitigate and conserve. But look, we know that water storage and water resources are absolutely critical. And so we have to look at everything, and we're going to have to be we're going to have to think outside the box sometimes on some of these things. I will note, though, that this is, again, the worst drought in 1,200 years in the West. And it's not just Utah. Of course, other states in the West are having these same conversations. That's a big deal. We know that the great drought of the year 800 didn't last forever, and we certainly hope that this one doesn't either, and that we can get back to having those conversations about how to help Washington County grow. But in the short term, those conversations are important conversations to have. What are we going to do? Where is the growth going to come from? Do we have enough to support that growth? There are hard decisions that will have to be made, and Mother Nature will play a role in how difficult those decisions are going to be.
Governor, can you update us on your opinion on the gondola versus bus proposal still being considered for Little Cottonwood? Are you still leaning toward the gondola? Yeah,
nothing's changed in that sense. It's been a while since I've really taken a look at it. I've certainly supported the gondola in the past. All of those numbers are coming in, and UDOT will make that ultimate decision. Ultimately, the legislature will make that decision where some of that funding comes from. But both of those options were found to be valid options, and so as that process moves forward, as they look at the environmental repercussions, as they look at the fiscal repercussions, and then the practical repercussions of how we get people up and down the canyons, all of those things are really important and matter, and we'll certainly look at all of them when the time is right.
And would you support an audit into whether UDOT is being impacted by outside influences, given some environmental groups are alleging the NEPA process has not been objective?
Well, certainly we audit all the time, and I have absolutely the full faith in UDOT and the way that they do business. I'm deeply disappointed that any sort of unsubstantiated allegation like that would be thrown around. Just because you don't get your way doesn't mean that people are bad or evil or breaking the law. And so I'm very close to UDOT and their processes, and feel very comfortable with the way that they're doing things.
Governor, the legislature passed a bill that forces cities in Salt Lake County to come up with a plan for a winter homeless overflow shelter. If they don't, current homeless resource centers can increase their capacity. Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall is worried about the impacts to residents and people within the shelter, and some lawmakers have said this bill goes back on commitments that were made to keep shelters small. So what's your response to those concerns?
Well, my response is that we have to take care of people, and we have to take care of people in the worst of times, and that's what we do. And so, you know, we certainly support working on those overflow shelters. They're temporary shelters. We've been doing that for the past couple of years. We've certainly had nights when we've had to increase capacity at the shelters when it's really cold, and when we need to get people off the streets. And you know, we've had conversations from the city and county during those times that yeah, it may not be politically popular, but we have to do that. And so we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that we can keep people safe, keep people alive, and get people off the streets during those worst times. And I support the bill.
How do you view the state's role in this versus local government?
Well, it's always been kind of an awkward dance or collaboration, sometimes better than others, but it's a fractured system. It just is. That's the way it is. We've certainly looked for ways to improve and enhance that, but what I am pleased with is that, and this is something that has not happened historically, the state has taken a much more active role, especially in the funding piece. And I've made that argument to the League of Cities and Towns, and I've stood before them and said, look, you know, I've been a mayor, I've been a county commissioner. We didn't have a homelessness problem. Do you know why we didn't have a homelessness problem? Because if you're homeless and you live in Fairview or you live in Sanpete County, you go to Salt Lake because that's where the resources are. And so everyone in this state has a role to play in supporting those cities and counties where they are taking on an outsized burden, and we've been doing that. I can't remember exactly when it was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, that we passed the surcharge that comes from other cities that then goes into a fund to help support these cities that are taking on an additional burden. And I think if you look, you'll see that the state is spending more money on homelessness now than it has ever in the past, and that we are getting additional support to places like South Salt Lake, to Salt Lake City, to Ogden, to St. George, to help supplement their police forces, to help supplement everything else that they need to make sure that these facilities operate and support the neighborhoods where they're involved.
Governor, to follow up on the conversation about transgender youth and athletics, it doesn't appear that this issue will go away, even after a veto. Do you have any thoughts on what comes next and whether it's still possible to find any middle ground on this issue?
Well, I would certainly hope so. You know, again, we were very close. I've lamented that. But I think, you know, what comes next is the resolution of lawsuits across the country. And so we'll get some answers. And we've done that in the past with controversial issues for sure, and we'll see how those go. Eventually, there will I'm assuming there will be a Supreme Court decision at some point, and that will hopefully help to settle where we are. In the meantime, I would love to be a state that figures out if there is some common ground in a better way. Again, I think we were very close, and I think it's a way that could help other states that are struggling with this as well.
Governor Cox, after Zelensky addressed, the United States and Biden promised money for Ukraine aid, do you think there's more that the United States should be doing in helping the invasion over there?
Sure. I know that everybody is suddenly an expert on European politics and military conflict. It is what I studied in college, and certainly something that I pay close attention to. I have lamented and am concerned that our ability as a nation to lead on the world stage has been compromised over the past decade, especially. And I believe that the world needs a strong United States, and I think that we have an opportunity. I'm struck by remembering that in World War II, when the United States was not involved and Pearl Harbor happened, and a famous quote from a high-ranking Japanese official that said, I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant, and certainly that is what has happened. I believe that Vladimir Putin has awakened a sleeping giant in Europe. That a united Europe is a very positive thing for the world. I believe he has also awakened a slumbering giant, at least the citizens of the United States, who are remembering how important our freedoms are, and protecting freedoms across the world. And I sincerely hope that the administration can and will be more proactive. Look, we should not be engaging in direct conflict. I think making sure that we keep those off-ramps open and those diplomatic channels open, and that we avoid a broader world war conflict or nuclear conflict should absolutely be our top priority. That being said, we should also be doing everything we possibly can to arm and sustain the Ukrainians, not just to hold off the Russians, but we should be seeking Ukrainian victory at every stage, and we can do that. We've already given them weapons. We should give them more weapons. I thought I listened live to the speech from President Zelensky. That is real leadership, and I applaud him. And I thought his requests were admirable. He absolutely should be requesting a no-fly zone. We are also right to say we're not going to put our planes in the air and shoot down Russian planes. That would clearly be an escalation. And but there are other things that we can do to help them keep their skies clear. And providing those weapon systems, I think, it should absolutely be on the table, and I would definitely support that.
How was the response to the fundraising drive that you announced, both in terms of money and in supplies?
Look, this is Utah at its best. Never surprised, always overwhelmed. So what we know so far is that over $1 million from regular Utahns has been donated, and $2 million from Utah philanthropists so far. So we are now at $3 million, and those donations can still be given, monetary donations. As far as the goods, the physical donations, that has closed. They had space for, I believe, about 40 pallets or containers on the airplane, and we have over 200 pallets or containers, because again, that's what Utah does. The First Lady received over 500 volunteers for their initiative to sort these products and get them ready to ship. It's just incredible when you ask. People step up. We ask for letters from school children children across the state and to give to children there to deliver these diapers and other things. And we've just been overwhelmed. We have stacks to the ceiling of letters from kids. Some of them, a few classes even figured out how to write in Ukrainian and to deliver those messages in their native languages. And it was really, really amazing. Thanks.
How do you
thanks for the
plan to get
question.
it over there if the Intermountain Jet times 5?
Yeah, we're working on that right now. We have a little logistical problem right now, but we're working with everyone we can, with Delta Airlines, with the National Guard, the Department of Defense. We'll figure out a way to get them there.
You know when that might get over there?
We don't. We're still working on that piece of it.
Governor, I wanted to follow up on Lindsay's question about common ground on this issue around trans youth participation in sports. Talk about what common ground could possibly look like when we have LGBTQ advocates seeing this as discrimination against a certain group of people.
Yeah, it's hard to. I mean, there's a reason this is a very divisive issue, right? I mean, I firmly believe that we have to protect women's sports. That's so critical, and so it does make it difficult. I will say that many in the LGBTQ community have said that they're deeply concerned about that piece that you mentioned, but also the piece of where we do have athletes at the collegiate level who are dominating the sports. Like, that's not good for them either, because it's turning people who are allies and supportive against them because of the discrimination that's happening to biologically born women, and so that's the rub, right? That's the difficult thing, and I'm always hopeful. I think that we're better off when we're working closely together to try to solve these problems than when we go to our own corners and just lob grenades. And so that's what I will continue to push for.
Okay, looks like we are out of questions, so we'll give you back about 10 minutes of your time today, and we appreciate you answering all the questions.
We'll take it. That's like 2 or 3 bills I can get through, maybe. The small ones, if I read really quickly. Again, just want to thank all of you. Hope you have a wonderful day, and enjoy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.